What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. If you want to support me, you can always use that TCGplayer link in the description down below. Follow me on Patreon, like, comment, or subscribe, and as recently as now, I've decided, hey, let's be one of the top 10 followed brewers on Moxfield. So if you'd help me out with that, that would be amazing. Now, let's get into today's Precon upgrade with Fey Dominion. And honestly, the deck seems kind of weird. It seems like a weird tempo deck, which is not that great in Commander. It wants you to bounce your opponent's creatures, bounce your creatures. There's a lot of, mill, but not a lot of recursion. It's just kind of a weird deck. So we're going to focus it a little bit by adding some recursion. We're going to take out some of the tempo plays and add in just straight up removal, and then we're going to add some more solid card draw options. That way it's not just, hey, fairy enters the battlefield, draw a card, because that's not very good in Commander. So we focused it a lot. We added some bombs in there like Arami of the Dead Tide. Remember, our commander is going to draw us a card whenever a fairy dies, so giving them all Encore is an amazing ability that's just going to draw us 3 cards, right? Pretty busted. So let's get into these Precon upgrades. The first things we're going to throw in the deck is Spark Double and Vile Duplication. What I like about these cards is we can go ahead and make a copy of our commander, buffing our fairies up even more, and then whenever our fairies die, we get to draw even more cards. So it's going to be pretty good for both of those effects. Victimize, Dread Return, and Hell's Caretaker will not only act as solid sack outlets, but they will also return our fairies that have gone to the graveyard back to the battlefield. Kindred Discovery is always going to be amazing in these tribal builds. We're not only going to draw a card whenever a fairy enters the battlefield, we are also going to draw a card whenever a fairy attacks, which is very impactful. Biden of Thassa, also pretty good. We can make it to where one of our opponents completely swings out, making it to where they are fully open. I mean, 9 times out of 10, our creatures are going to have flying regardless, but just making sure that they're open is going to be solid, and then we can swing out to draw a lot of cards. I went ahead and added a few more fairies in the deck as well. We have Moonshade Pixie. I like this because it's not going to be that hard to deal damage to each of our opponents, and then whenever this enters the battlefield, we will draw 3 cards. Likeness Looter is not only a pretty good looter, it can also just turn itself into a copy of anything in our graveyard, which is going to be super useful. Fairy Mastermind, this one's just card draw on a fairy. I can't believe they didn't include this guy because he even has Flash, which goes with the other theme of the deck. Another one that goes with the other theme of the deck, casting fairies on our opponent's turn, Spell Stutter Sprite. This is just going to be a solid counter spell in this deck that's also a fairy. I also liked Cloud Seeder. This is going to be a solid discard outlet while creating fairy tokens, which seems like a pretty solid way to get going wide in this deck. Fairy Artisans honestly seem solid, especially with how much ETB effects are in Commander, and now all of our opponents' ETB effects are our ETB effects. It's going to be pretty solid. Arami of the Dead Tide. Now, this one is not a fairy, but honestly, it's going to be amazing. Just giving our fairies Encore, throwing them onto the battlefield, they get buffed by our commander, and then whenever we have to sacrifice them, we're going to draw 3 cards because of that Encore ability and getting 3 of those tokens. That just seems like a really good way to not only put ourselves ahead of our opponents, but draw through our deck. The next thing I really wanted to do is make sure we're putting more fairies on the battlefield, because honestly there's not a ton of ways to do that in the deck. Stolen by the Fae is going to be a solid way to not only get one of our opponent's threats, it's also going to create a lot of fairy tokens. Notorious Throng. We have a lot of rogues in the deck because fairy and rogues go together pretty well. So now not only will we be creating a lot of fairy tokens, we can also just take an extra turn. There's a very good chance this is just going to end one of our opponents. Feywild Visitor, again, we have a lot of flyers, so the fact that we could deal 1 damage to each of our opponents, making 1 fairy token every turn pretty consistently is going to be really good in this deck. That's going to do it for the upgrades, guys. I really wanted to keep it short and sweet. If you want to see what I cut, go ahead and check out that Moxfield link. Don't forget to follow me while you're there, and as always, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors.